Okay, hello, very warm welcome everybody to our Leveraging AI webinar. We are going to be packing a lot into the next 30 minutes and we're not going to be hanging around, so I'm going to jump straight into some introductions and a bit of housekeeping. So my name is John Paget. I'm Senior Partner at Open Velocity, a marketing consultancy. I'm joined by Beth and Vincent, who is Managing Partner of Open Velocity, as well as Katie Thompson, who is Managing Director of Katie Lingo, a marketing services agency. So we are going to be talking about AI in marketing and specifically about ChatGPT. ChatGPT is a bit of background, as I'm sure everybody will know, is a chatbot that's powered by artificial intelligence. It's been around since the end of November 2022. And it's caused a bit of a stir. Everybody, in fact, is talking about it. There's some big numbers attached to it. So the company behind it is reportedly worth $29 million. It's got some big backers in the sense of Microsoft investing reportedly $1 billion, I should say. And in the first 5 days, it had 1 million users. So this led us to have a conversation around its use in marketing and whether it was all hype or whether there would actually be some practical uses for it. And so that's what our ambition is over the next 30 minutes or so. I should add, if you've got any questions, please pop them in the chat. If we have time, which might be ambitious, but if we do have time, we'll try to come to them. If we don't, everything that we do today is going to be recorded and made available on the Open Velocity website next week. And we will endeavour to answer the questions when we pop the content up on there. Okay, so hopefully that understood in a bit of context. Bethel, I'm going to come to you with the first question, which is, I know we've all obviously been playing around with ChatGPT. So what are your opening and first impressions?
Yeah, great question. So I was probably quite an early adopter of AI content generators in general. So even before ChatGPT, I was playing around with GPT-3 and things like Jasper, Copy AI, some of the kind of paid for tooling. And that was really just because I was interested and I was like, oh, maybe this can, speed up content creation, do things like keyword research faster, all of that kind of stuff. But I think maybe this analogy works, maybe it doesn't. But for me, GPT in particular is kind of like junk food. On the surface, you're kind of like, this is good, like this is great, this is producing some stuff, I can kind of see how I can use it. But actually, when you dig into it further, you realize the limitations of it and it doesn't leave you fully satisfied. So for example, a lot of people are using it in terms of creating fully fledged blog posts. So they might do that through one prompt or a series of prompts chained together to kind of expand on things as it goes. And the ultimate result is kind of okay. It's fine. It's like a lot of kind of mass-produced SEO content. It answers questions in a very surface level kind of way, but it's got no surface, it's got no depth. And we'll probably come on to a little bit around kind of Google's treatment of AI-generated content and some thoughts around what's going to happen there. But I think this kind of surface level junk food nature is going to be an issue. It does require human intervention on top of it. We can't just rely on it out the box.
Cool. And Katie, what are your initial impressions?
Well, I love that junk food analogy there, Bethan. In fact, I was talking to my husband about it last night and I said, well, we can look at any technology like a microwave. I could microwave lasagna or I could cook it from scratch and it'll be delicious. I'll be full either way, but what will be a better experience? And I think, there are a lot of parallels there. Obviously, as a copywriter, I'm going to feel very strongly about it. I'm going to feel very emotional about it. I feel like you can't really be on the fence about ChatGPT, just because it's everywhere. Everyone is talking about it at the moment. We're probably all sick of it. But I think, as with any new technology, there's this kind of sense of trepidation, but also excitement at the same time. And I'm really seeing very strong, very sort of polarized views. From a technical standpoint, loads of people saying how much time it saves them, how it can generate code and all sorts of stuff. But then you're seeing like the copywriter perspective, which is saying it can't replace humans. It can't give you those creative outputs, those personal touches. But I think realistically, we can't pretend it doesn't exist. You could look at things like, let's say, Clubhouse, that was the next big thing, or voice search, that's the next big thing. Some things are the next big thing, maybe like TikTok, but not so much things like Clubhouse. So I think we have to acknowledge that it's going to be part of our world now. We definitely, as copywriters, we're going to have to use it to our advantage rather than just pretending it doesn't exist. but I'm seeing a lot of opinions on it, and there are so many kind of layers to it, sort of ethics and fact checking and stuff like that. So I think there is a long way to go before we can fully use it to our advantage, but don't be threatened by it, I guess, would be my overall summary.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm a bit conscious that anybody tuning in hasn't used it, may not understand actually just how simple it is to use. I mean, to me, this feels like such a step change in the technology, because it's the first chatbot, like you're talking to a computer in the same way that we might be talking to each other on WhatsApp. And the quality of the response that quite often comes back is impressive. It seems really impressive, at least. Until, as maybe Bethan, you were describing, you sort of dig under the surface and you think, actually, we need to be sort of critical about the quality of the content that's being retrieved. But yeah, I think it's that ease of which you can interact with it, which seems to have got everybody talking about it. Because I think for me, one of the points is that AI has been around for a long time, right? This feels like an evolutionary step rather than a revolutionary one, but this is crossing over from things that are AI that's powering tools that we might use into something that's very much in your face, that you can interact with in a way that we haven't had before, certainly at a sophistication level that we haven't had before. And I think that's what's got everybody really jumping up and down.
Absolutely.
I mean, I guess as a segue into our next question then, in terms of sort of practical marketing uses, people may be logging in or reading up on ChatGPT and thinking, well, how actually can I use this technology? What do we think? Katie, maybe I come to you first.
Yeah, sure. So I actually think, in terms of marketing, in my head, I sort of separate marketing sort of to the creative and the technical side of things. And again, I would say this as a defensive copywriter. I think it's much better for the technical output. So, I've seen a lot of use cases of it on LinkedIn, people even who are absolutely diametrically opposed to it saying, oh, actually, it has been really helpful for writing things like schema markup that's gone from 10 hours to 10 minutes, things like that. In terms of like writing code, I'm a coder, I have no idea, but I know my husband is a coder, and he's said that he's used it before to write things like regex statements, which we've then used to kind of plug into like a lead generation tool. So I think for more the sort of stuff that we want to automate anyway, that is just generally quite dull and very time consuming and probably quite costly, then it can be really helpful. It's kind of a stepping stone to creating bigger, better things. I'm just looking at my notes here. People use things like VLOOKUPs for SEO. So certainly for the technical side of things, maybe for some creative things that aren't necessarily going to excite readers, for example, meta descriptions, product descriptions. I'd be a little bit cautious with them, particularly with like product descriptions. If I'm going to buy a pair of trainers, if I really am kind of drawn into this, rather than just like blue trainers. But I think, well, it's probably better just for lots of, small, quick tasks, rather than anything that requires a kind of creative inspiration.
And I guess, Bethan, that's where we've certainly been talking a lot about it, right? Is that, yeah, I think we would all agree that more technical side of the content, this could be really useful for. It's more where it comes into, I guess, the traditional copywriter territory of writing, I mean, at the basic level, subject lines, blog titles, but also then actually paragraphs of copy that can be used. And I know you've got some strong views on that. So I guess, what's your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, again, like it's back to the junk food thing. Actually, for the title of this webinar, I used it to come up with the title of this webinar. But gosh, I know. But, it was a very kind of like a functional thing. I don't think, by the way, I'm not saying the title of this webinar is the most creative title ever. There's definitely more that could be done there, but it was a rapid way of me of spinning something up as a time poor marketer. But that's the thing, like I'm saying, the quality wasn't quite there. I think if I'd spent, a good couple of hours thinking about it, I personally could have come up with something better. And I think it's really interesting from a creative point of view also. I don't know if anyone else struggles with this, but I'm a writer who loves having written and I hate writing. So I love the end result, I hate the process. And the worst thing for me is a blank page. And actually where I've found it helps me from a creative point of view is not actually writing the content, but is that initial idea generation. So giving it a prompt, something like, you know, what are 5 different ways you could think about lead generation in this particular vertical? And it will spit some stuff out. And I'm applying then my knowledge, my expertise, my kind of contextualization of what it spits out and building something off of that. So I guess like to go back, you know, from a technical point of view, we're using it as building blocks and we're using it to automate stuff that people were already automating through scripts. It just allows, it's almost like a no code tool in a way, because it's allowing you through text instead of a graphical interface to build code. But from a creative point of view, it can just do the building blocks. That's really where I see it. I'd be extremely uncomfortable, for example, producing a piece of content for a client or giving the client a piece of content that had been purely written by it. Inspired and maybe leveraging it in that initial ideation phase, okay. But I would be running it through an AI detection tool, to be perfectly honest.
And we are dangerously entering territory of limitations here, which is exactly the topic we're about to come on to. But before we do that, I wanted to sort of slightly jump out of ChatGPT territory and staying in AI territory, which is to mention DALL-E, which is the image-based AI that OpenAI, that's the organization that runs or has launched ChatGPT. They released that before they released ChatGPT, and this for me as a marketer is really exciting. Quite often for me, the challenge with whether it's putting a web page together or building an email is actually the images are more of the headache than the copy. And the idea that AI might be able to help generate images that I've got permissions to use, images that exactly fit the description of the content that I want to create, something I'm not shoehorning in, and something that exactly meets my requirements is really exciting. And I think, again, I'm going to jump ahead and say that I think DALL-E combined with a ChatGPT is a really interesting space. But I'm going to leave that for further down the track. So before we get any further, and I maybe should just say, if you're watching this and you haven't had a look at DALL-E or ChatGPT, if you can get onto it, because so many people are using it, go and have a play, because it's the best way to experiment. So let's come on to the limitations. So we touched on it there, Bethan, with you were talking about a little bit about that. Do you want to maybe pick up on what you see as the limitations, and particularly perhaps mentioned Google?
Yeah, and so what's about to happen is the internet is going to be flooded with even more mediocre content, because the bar of producing and the speed of producing content has been massively lowered, right? And Google, you know, rightfully so, is going to, you know, have to have some way of combating this, because especially from a fact-checking point of view, that's going to be really important. And you'll notice they recently updated the webmaster guidelines for the first time, I think, in quite a long time. And they've also introduced, so we've had EAT for a while, and they've got a new E, so it's EEAT, so it's experience and expertise now. And I think they've done that as a preemptive, well, it's not even preemptive, the AI kind of content revolution is here, right? But they've done that obviously to have a measure of, you know, what authority, what extra contextual information is this content covering, you know. And I think the challenge is that producing good content to a standard that is adding something substantial to the user, new knowledge, new information, new contextualization, that's a really high barrier. And not many businesses were doing that anyway. You know, they were producing this very kind of like, just like SEO headline keyword stuff type content. And actually, whether it's produced by a human or produced by an AI, that style of content is going to be penalized in my view. And the bar has just been raised, frankly. And that's quite exciting, because I think from, you know, as a user of the internet, you know, it's the worst thing when you type in, like, you've got a question and you go into Google and you type in, and the top 10 answers are all these SEO kind of like listicle style pieces. And you're like, but this is giving me nothing, you know, this is giving me no extra information. And, you know, there's talk about, you know, obviously Bing or incorporating it into their search functionality. So, you know, are we going to have AI returned answers that are complete? Is the SERP going to go? I can't speak to that. I don't know. But I think in terms of limitations, it exposes a limitation in content and the way content has been produced in the past. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. That's quite a rambling argument, but I think what I'm trying to say is basically that it's not necessarily fundamentally changed the game. It's just sped up and accelerated a lot of things that were happening already, and a lot of kind of ways Google was trying to understand quality content. They've had to adapt to it, but I think they were going to do that anyway, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, and that feels like a really important point, because it's I think there's lots of really bad content out there already, right? We don't need ChatGPT to create lots of it. It's already there. And so actually our abilities to find and to curate the best sources of information is just going to become even more important. And whether we do that personally through the people that we trust and the authoritative sources that we know, or if it's Google improving its ability to sort through the rubbish and the clutter and surface the really good stuff, that's clearly going to be a challenge. Katie, what are your thoughts?
Just to kind of build on what Bethan said, obviously with all the Google considerations, there's also the helpful content update. And one of the things that really kind of cranks down on is non-unique content. I think some of the examples they talk about is sort of movie reviews. If it's just the same thing, you're not getting a new content, and that's essentially not helping users. And obviously any AI content is built on stuff that is already out there. And a huge flaw within ChatGPT and OpenAI is that its data is essentially out of date. By its own admission, its data, I think the limitation is up to June 2021. So today, for example, I was playing with it for the first time I could get on it in ages, and I was asking it questions about my favorite singer, God rest his soul, Meatloaf. And I was like, please tell me about Meatloaf. And it was like, Meatloaf is this many years old and blah, blah, blah. Meatloaf died last year. If you ask about Queen Elizabeth, it will say Queen Elizabeth is this age. It will say, Donald Trump is president or whatever. It's not up to date. So if you want to write about anything that's happened after June 2021, it's not going to help you whatsoever. So again, with the fact checking, that's a real issue, particularly if we're thinking about stuff like your money or your life content. Also just things like ethical considerations as well. This is something I talked about a lot at Brighton SEO in October, which was before ChatGPT even came out, but it was just like, content writers, will AI take your job? And there are ethical considerations like the biases, things like auto-suggesting. If I search on LinkedIn for Stephanie, it says, did you mean Stephen? Or like Google word mapping studies say that woman is homemaker and man is computer programmer and stuff like that, because it's all built on human inputs, garbage in, garbage out. So it's going to have those inherent biases. And I think, well, in a world where we're trying to be more inclusive, what kind of output are we going to get if it's being trained on biased inputs? So there's a lot to think about. There's so much to unpack. Yeah,
there is. And I maybe tip of the hat to Dr. Dave Chaffee, who I think, among many others, has been writing some really good content on ChatGPT. He's written a post recently, and as I was reading it, I very much got that he was talking about prompt engineering, and Bethan, you was touching on this earlier about the sense that it's just like any other tool, right? When you learn Google, you learn the keywords that you've got to put in to get the kinds of responses that you want out. And that's effectively what people are starting to do with ChatGPT. They're understanding its limitations in order to use it most effectively as a tool. And I think that that's a really interesting way of looking at it. And as he didn't describe it in this way, but it very much felt like he'd ended up, through the course of all the iterations he was making to the questions he was asking it, like he was treating it as a brief. Like you would an agency, like you would a freelancer. He effectively, through 7 or 8 iterations of the content, had created a brief for it. And I think that if you are going to use it and get round its limitations, you've got to be prepared, A, to invest a bit of time to understand what its limitations are. And Katie, totally agree on anything that's written in the last couple of years, it's clearly not going to be able to help on, and it's going to be just flat out wrong. And then to be able to take the time to be able to massage it into the kind of content that you want at the end of it by all these prompts and these little nudges to try to engineer the solution, which then begs the question, what's the point? Why not give the person in the first place?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And some of the best things I've read on the internet are very clearly written from someone's personal point of view. They're in their style. There is a joy to reading good writing. And I think, I won't go on my rant about how, we've lost our focus on literature as a society. That's probably a talk for anyone if ever wanted to go to a pub for a pint with me. But, that's the thing, like writing is a craft at the end of the day, and doing it well and engaging users and building a cohesive argument, because that's especially when you're writing marketing content, it's persuasive, right? That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to nudge, we're trying to persuade, and doing that yourself is going to be, you're going to be able to, if you're good at it, do a much better job than a machine, in my opinion.
Absolutely. There's that storytelling element, isn't there? I mean, an example I used again at Brighton was kind of using AI, using ClearScope, and I don't know if you've ever used that before, but it sort of tells you in theory how well you'll rank based on distribution of various keywords and themes. And an article I wrote, I used a Jasper AI version, I used my own version. It was about marathon running, and obviously I'm going to drop this in that I've run 6 marathons, but my one came out much higher than the Jasper AI one, and that's because I've just got my own personal experiences of that. And again, going back to the helpful content update, it says that your own personal experiences like product reviews, things like that, are a lot more helpful to people. So hopefully Google cracks down on that as well.
Right, time is whizzing by, and I'm really interested in the last question, which is, where do we go from here? So a bit of sort of context before maybe Beth and I come to you, which is that there are rumours circulating that an updated version of ChatGPT is going to be out later this year. So, we can consider, if you're lucky enough to get on and be able to use it, it's an experiment and they're learning from that. So we're in effect all helping to improve ChatGPT for the next iteration. Also, some really interesting comments from Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI. It's free currently. It's not going to be free forever. The costs to just keep it running on the web are going to be eye-watering, and so there's going to be some kind of commercial model that's going to come in that opens up a whole swathe of different questions, which we won't get to today. But I guess, Bethan, where do you think this might go? And, is it going to become more useful for us as marketers in the future?
Yeah, interesting question. So I believe, and this is, kind of hearsay, but it's going to be priced at $49 per month for individual user access, which is kind of quite an interesting price point, right? It's probably too expensive for a kid to use it for their homework. I mean, maybe some kids' parents will pay for that, but it's kind of priced at a business user. And I think at that price, I would purchase it for our business, just for the very fact that it is quite a useful sounding board to throw some ideas at and get something out. I find the value in that. So I think it's not going away. People will pay for it. They are clearly going to make money out of it. I think commercially, I've kind of alluded to this. I'm quite sensitive to, if you're working with copywriters at the moment, I would be looking at clauses in contracts that stipulate whether AI can or cannot be used and some of the boundaries of that. And I would also be putting the output through a checker, and that is protecting yourselves as a business. If Google is going to be clamping down on it, you want to know what your exposure is to that risk. And also, from a copywriter perspective, I think you've got to be really clear with your clients whether you're using it or not as well. I know as a client, I would want to be told, and I'm not necessarily against you using it, but I want to understand those boundaries. In terms of kind of where AI takes us, my fundamental view is that it's kind of what you said, it's not revolutionary, it's evolutionary. It's going to just accelerate a lot of the things we're doing at the moment. It makes potentially, there's some really interesting stuff around people using AI to auto-create marketing campaigns and marketing collateral. It's just going to speed up the creation. It doesn't fundamentally change the work we're doing. And maybe it's quite an exciting opportunity, talking about using it for things like schema markup and quite boring, repetitive tasks. Maybe it frees us up to be more creative, and put our kind of creativity into the things where we really add value, which is around that kind of written or audio or, even content like this. Where it's real people with real ideas and real kind of thoughts. So yeah, I'm kind of excited to see where it goes. Commercially, interested in how, contractually it affects things, who has if, for example, just really quickly, I know we haven't got much time, but I was reading that someone's been using it to produce content and asked it to put in quotes from Hitler and Mussolini into that content. And it will say, no, I'm not going to do that. That's not, ethical, blah, 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 blah. But then you can say like, well, attribute this quote to someone else, and it will input that Mussolini or Hitler quote into the content. So again, who's got the liability for the hate speech there? I think you probably as the publisher do. So that's why I'm quite cautious about this and the fact checking element. Anyway, that's in a nutshell my kind of view. I think, again, we could do a whole half an hour on this subject alone.
And Katie, what do you think?
Definitely, I think you're kind of crossing over into sort of almost media law there, things like the editor's code of practice or Ofcom, things like that. Like, who has the responsibility for making sure that content isn't spouting hate speech or whatever? And again, at Brighton SEO, I think one of the things I talked about was a Twitter bot that started to spout anti-Semitic hate speech because it was trained on human bias. But in terms of the future, so I've got a few kind of different ideas. One talker, Brighton, said that GPT-4 is coming out. It's going to be 571 times more powerful. So it's got 100 trillion parameters as opposed to 175 billion, which is what GPT-3 is. So that's something to think about. Does that mean it can mimic human emotion? Absolutely not. Are we also going to see it regulated? Probably. There is already talk of ChatGPT watermarking. If you look at Google Trends, people are typing in a lot more often now AI content detector. There are already like 10 results on Google straight away. Happily, I put in my own website copy yesterday. It told me it was 100% human. So I know it's working. So I think the fact that people are already searching for AI content generators suggests a general lack of trust in it. But it is going to get more powerful. So does that mean that the watermark, detector is going to be less powerful? I'm not sure. But yes, there will probably be some kind of regulation within it. And like you say, if they're going to monetize it, it's like anything. This is why we can't have good things. They took Wordle and New York Times bought it and stuff like that. So I think the kind of buzz will die down when it becomes a bit more commercialized and invariably regulated.
Yeah, and I think just on that, I think maybe we can put some of the best articles that maybe we've read on the website along with this recording next week so that anybody can go and check it out. But I think on that regulation piece, if there's a lot of money to be lost by industries being disrupted, then I think we'll see a lot of coordination happening to make sure that regulation comes in. And so I think, and the more organized sector, the more organized in industry, I think the more likely that is to happen. You can't imagine the legal sector, legal industry being railroaded by this because they will simply put the barriers up. They're too well organized. There's too much money involved. So I too can see regulation coming in. There's a really good post I read about that, which I'll put up on the site. I think for me, the futures is a really interesting one. I mentioned it earlier. I think we've currently got voice AI, we've got image AI with DALL-E, and then we've got ChatGPT, which is the first chatbot that is effectively able to have a reasonable conversation with us and provide answers. I think if we get to a point where those start to merge, and rather than having three distinct AIs or three distinct programs, if we start to see one that can do everything, you can speak to and it can spit out really sensible, accurate copy and match that with image creation, which is effectively what they're trying to do, but in distinct silos. I think that's where it starts to get super interesting and potentially very helpful. But yeah, the whole money aspect of this, how they're going to commercialize it and how they're going to make money from it is also really interesting.
Yeah, and they'll make money for your own data as well. And again, when you sign up to the tool, it's kind of saying, look, I'm using this data set from, up until June 2021. But there's already indications that the data we are feeding into it. And again, by the way, just with my kind of like legal commercial hat on, don't feed it any commercially sensitive information because it's definitely storing it. It's definitely utilizing that. It definitely spits it back out at you if you ask it. So it's recording it to its database. So yeah, it's going to be a minefield, I think.
Yeah, no, it certainly is. Right. Unbelievably, we are 4:30. And we said we would keep this short and sweet on a Friday afternoon. So I don't know whether either of you have any final words that you want to just creep in. Otherwise, we'll wrap up.
I think, that this is clearly kind of our own opinions, but that's what's quite interesting about, like, we can have a debate about this, and can a machine have a well-reasoned debate with you, and have an opinionated point of view on a subject, especially if it's building on the corpus of all available information in the internet. So I kind of say that our very ability to have this debate is what makes us human, is what makes this content. Hopefully people have found it interesting. I definitely have. So yeah, I'd leave you maybe on that kind of meta analysis of our discussion.
Beautiful. And just to add to that, I think specifically for the content writers, I don't want to be ignorant or myopic, but I don't think we should be threatened. I think we should be aware of it. But like you say, Bethan, if that is saving us time so that we can put more energy and more love into creative outputs, and if anything, that's going to make us even better at our jobs. And, we're not going to go anywhere, I hope.
Brilliant. Well, maybe we should do this in another 12 months and review what 2023 was like with
when I'm homeless.
ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Great. Well, let's wrap up there. I think I will just end by saying that again, the recording, maybe some useful articles that I think maybe the three of us have found useful will be going up on the Open Velocity website next week. I think we'll be sending out an email with the link to that. So you'll get that in your inboxes next week. But thanks very much, everybody, for joining. Katie, thank you. Bethan, thank you. Been great. So yeah, let's do it again soon.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thanks
everyone.
guys. See you later.